Scott Walker introduced himself to the country day before yesterday with his announcement speech, and I have 22 clips from his speech that I want to share with you over the course of the next 2.5 hours, or 2 3/4, along with my commentary, because I think, A, this guy is going to be the Republican nominee for president, or at worst, vice president. But I think he's going to be the nominee for president because the Koch brothers are behind him and they now own the Republican Party, or a good chunk of it. And you've got a Koch brothers operative who is now running Donald Trump's campaign, and Donald Trump is running around trashing Jeb Bush. He's not trashing Scott Walker. He's trashing Jeb Bush. And I think, Donald Trump's a billionaire. The Koch brothers are billionaires. I think the billionaires got together and said, we don't want Bush. And leading the charge against Bush, Donald Trump. And then once Bush is knocked out, once Bush or Jeb, he doesn't like using Bush. Once Jeb Bush is knocked out of the race, then Scott Walker becomes the presumptive nominee and, off to the White House. With Marco Rubio as his running mate, or Brian Sandoval, or somebody like that. So anyhow, this is the first clip. We'll just take them in chronological order. Scott Walker working at McDonald's.
Now, as a kid, my first job was washing dishes at the Countryside Restaurant. Now, as a kid, my first job was washing dishes at the Countryside Restaurant. Then I moved up to the big time. I started flipping hamburgers in high school at McDonald's.
Those days, for him, that would have been the 1980s. For me, that was the 1960s. But pretty much the same. Reaganism had not yet sunk into America. And you could actually pay for your college tuition by working, a summer job. I did. But my mother did. My father got the GI Bill. Most of my friends did. I mean, tuition was cheap at community colleges and state universities. I mean, I didn't go to Harvard, but... So I find it a little ironic that Scott Walker, who has in the budget that he just signed last week in Wisconsin, cut $250 million out of funding for the University of Wisconsin. Scott Walker, who opposes unions, which provide good pay. Scott Walker, who thinks we should have no minimum wage, is bragging about the fact that he was alive during a time in America when New Deal economics were being practiced, and you could actually work a summer job and put yourself through college. I mean, does he miss the irony of that? That those days are long gone? You have to have 2 people working full-time year long to pay for college now. It's nuts. Here's clip number 2 about his mom and dad's jobs.
My dad, who you heard before, was a small-town preacher, and my mom was a part-time secretary and bookkeeper.
Back then, part-time secretary, bookkeeper, small-town preacher, you could live in this country and have a middle-class lifestyle. The Social Security in inflation-adjusted terms was paying more than it is now for retired people. Wages were higher right across the board. Back then, the largest employer in the United States, which kind of set the floor for wages, was General Motors. And they were paying what in today's inflation-adjusted dollars would be somewhere between $45 and $55 an hour in today's money. You could raise a family on that. My dad did. He worked in a tool and die shop. But Walker isn't talking about, since Reaganism, his mom and dad probably would have had a much radically scaled back lifestyle. American, I think the average credit card debt now in the United States is I recall several numbers. One was 13,000 and the other is 27,000, but it's substantial. I mean, Americans are in debt just to maintain their lifestyle. Not to mention, $1.4 trillion in student debt. So here's Scott Walker bragging about how the economy worked so well when we were using FDR's economic model before Reagan had completely changed everything. In fact, clip number 3, this is about his grandfather.
My dad's dad was a machinist for 42 years at Barbara Coleman down in Rockford, Illinois.
Tool and die shop for 40 years in Lansing, Michigan. And he made enough money to buy a house and pay it off and buy a new car every 3 years, sometimes every 2 years, take us on vacation for a couple of weeks every year, help some of my brothers with the cost of going to school and you know, getting apprenticeships and whatnot. I mean, it was, and mom didn't work. You could do that back then. This was pre-Reagan. But Scott Walker's policies will not make it possible to go back to that era that he is bragging about. They will make it impossible. As president, he wants to double down on Reaganomics, as I will be sharing with you as we continue through the program today. I mean, just absolutely double down on Reaganomics.